The turbulence hit without warning, violent enough to rattle my teeth and send my coffee cascading across the tray table. I gripped Ethan's hand tighter as the aircraft shuddered, its metal frame groaning in protest against forces I understood too well from my years in the cockpit. The emergency alarm pierced through the cabin, a shrill reminder that 30,000 feet offered no margin for error. Around us, passengers gasped and clutched their armrests. But I kept my eyes forward, my jaw set, my breathing controlled. After everything I had survived, after all the missions that should have killed me, I refused to let fear show in front of my son. Ethan's small fingers squeezed mine back, and I glanced down at his face. Pale but brave. He was trying so hard to be strong, just like I had taught him. At 7 years old, he already understood more about loss than any child should. The turbulence subsided momentarily, and I allowed myself a breath. But something gnawed at the edges of my awareness. This was not normal turbulence. This was something else entirely. 6 months earlier, I had stood in Colonel Thorne's office at Nellis Air Force Base, the Nevada sun beating mercilessly through the windows behind him. He sat there in his perfectly pressed uniform, metals gleaming, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he reviewed my discharge papers. I had expected resistance, anger even, but not the cold amusement that radiated from him. "Jake Riley, call sign Phantom," he had said, drawing out my nickname like it was some kind of joke. 17 confirmed kills. Holder of the red flag record. The ghost who could dance through enemy radar like it was not even there. And now you want to walk away? Tell me. Riley, is this about Maria? The mention of her name was like a blade between my ribs. I had forced myself to remain standing at attention, to keep my voice level. "Sir, my reasons for requesting discharge are personal. I have fulfilled my obligations to the Air Force. I am simply exercising my right to return to civilian life." Thorne had leaned back in his chair, studying me with those calculating eyes that had always made my skin crawl. "Personal. Right. It has nothing to do with your little crusade to prove that your wife's death was not an accident. Nothing to do with the fact that you have been sniffing around classified reports, asking questions you have no business asking." I had clenched my fists behind my back, nails digging into my palms. Maria was one of the best pilots in her squadron. She did not make rookie mistakes. The official report said mechanical failure, but the evidence does not match that conclusion. Someone changed that report, and I think you know who. Thorne had stood then, moving to the window, his silhouette dark against the blinding light. "You know what your problem is. Riley, you cannot let things go. You think because you were the best, because you could do things in an F-22 that other pilots could not even imagine, that somehow makes you special. That somehow gives you the right to question decisions made by people far above your pay grade. I am not questioning decisions." I had shot back, my composure finally cracking. "I am questioning corruption. I am questioning why a pilot with Maria's record suddenly has catastrophic system failure during a routine training exercise with new equipment. Equipment manufactured by Obsidian Defense. Equipment that you now work for." The silence that followed had been suffocating. Thorne had turned slowly, and for a moment I had seen something dangerous flicker in his expression. Something that made every instinct I had honed in combat scream at me to be careful. "Lieutenant Riley," he had said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I am going to give you some advice. Take your honorable discharge. Take your son. Go build yourself a nice, quiet civilian life. Because if you keep digging into things that do not concern you, that honorable discharge might become something much less pleasant." Do we understand each other? I had understood perfectly. I had understood that Thorne was threatening me, that he had something to hide, and that whatever killed Maria was connected to him. But I also understood that I had Ethan to think about. So I had saluted, turned on my heel, and walked out of that office, carrying rage and grief in equal measure. Now, sitting on Flight 447 from Las Vegas to Washington, D.C., I was trying to convince myself that leaving it all behind had been the right choice. Ethan needed stability. He needed a father who came home every night. Not one who flew dangerous missions or pursued vendettas that could get him killed. I had traded in my flight suit for business casual. My F-22 for commercial airlines. My life of adrenaline for suburban normalcy. But the past has a way of finding you, no matter how fast you run. The woman sitting across the aisle had been watching me since we boarded. She was in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a laptop covered in stickers from aviation conferences. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, but I caught her glancing my way more than once, her gaze lingering on the faded tan line on my ring finger. The military precise way I had stowed my carry-on. The instinctive scan I had done of all the exits when we first entered the plane. When the flight attendant had passed by with drinks, the woman had finally leaned across the aisle. "Excuse me," she had said, her voice friendly but probing. "I could not help but notice your son's backpack. That is a pretty specific model of F-22 on there. Not something you see in toy stores." Ethan had perked up immediately, always eager to talk about planes. "My dad used to fly them. He was the best pilot in the whole Air Force." I had shot him a warning look. But the damage was done. The woman's eyes had lit up with recognition, and I had felt my stomach sink. "Really?" she had said, extending her hand across the aisle. "Sarah Vance. I am a journalist with Aviation Weekly. And if your dad flew Raptors, I would love to hear about it. We are always looking for stories about the men and women who fly those incredible machines." I had reluctantly shaken her hand, my grip firm but brief. "It is ancient history. I am civilian now." But Sarah Vance was not the type to be easily dissuaded. She had a way of asking questions that seemed casual but were anything but. A talent for making you want to fill silences with information you had no intention of sharing. Over the course of the next 20 minutes, as the plane taxied and prepared for takeoff, she had gradually assembled a picture of who I was, piece by careful piece. "So you were stationed at Nellis," she had said, as if confirming a fact rather than asking a question. "That is where they run Red Flag, the most intense air combat training in the world. I have covered it a few times. The pilots there are absolute legends." Ethan had been practically bouncing in his seat. "My dad has the record. He shot down more planes in Red Flag than anyone ever." Sarah's eyebrows had risen. "That is impressive. Very impressive. They do not hand out those kinds of achievements lightly. You must have had a call sign. Something memorable." I had felt the trap closing but could not see a way out without being rude. And something about Sarah's direct, no-nonsense manner made me reluctant to shut her down completely. She reminded me a little of Maria. The same sharp intelligence. The same refusal to back down from a challenge. "Phantom," I had finally said, the word tasting strange after months of not using it. The reaction had been immediate and dramatic. A man 3 rows back had jerked his head up, nearly spilling his drink. He was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with the distinctive posture and close-cropped haircut that screamed military even in civilian clothes. He had twisted in his seat, craning to see who had spoken, his eyes going wide when they landed on me. "No way," he had breathed, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "No freaking way." "Phantom? The Phantom? Jake Riley?" I had felt every eye in our section turn toward me. Felt the weight of recognition and expectation settle onto my shoulders like a physical thing. The man had unbuckled his seatbelt and moved into the aisle, coming closer despite the flight attendant's protest that we were preparing for takeoff. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," she had said. But he had ignored her, his focus entirely on me. "I am Marcus Jones," he had said, extending his hand with the kind of enthusiasm that made me want to sink through the floor. "Call sign Maverick. I am stationed at Langley now. Flying F-22 seconds with the 1st Fighter Wing. Sir, you are a legend. The things you did. The missions we heard about even though they were classified. The way you could make a raptor dance like it was an extension of your own body. Man, every pilot in the Air Force knows about you." Sarah had been scribbling notes furiously, her expression one of barely contained excitement. This is incredible. Phantom. I should have connected it sooner. There have been rumors about a pilot with that call sign for years. Stories about missions in Syria. About aircraft that appeared and disappeared from radar without a trace. About engagements that officially never happened, but everyone in the aviation community whispers about. Those stories are exaggerated, I had said firmly, but Maverick had been shaking his head. No, sir. They are not. I have flown with guys who trained with you. I have seen the footage from Red Flag. The way you executed a split S at 500 feet. The way you could predict enemy movements 3 steps ahead. You revolutionized air combat tactics. The manual we use today has your fingerprints all over it. Ethan had been glowing, with pride. His chest puffed out. See? I told you my dad is the best. But I had not felt proud. I had felt exposed. Vulnerable in a way I had not since Maria's death. These stories, these legends, they belonged to someone I used to be. Someone I had buried along with my wife. That was a long time ago, I had said quietly. I am just a dad now. Just a guy trying to get home. Maverick had looked like he wanted to argue. But something in my expression must have conveyed the depths of my discomfort because he had backed off, returning to his seat with visible reluctance. Sarah had continued to watch me, though. Her journalist's instincts clearly telling her there was a bigger story here. The captain's voice had crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a slight delay in our departure. There is some military training exercise activity in the area, and we have been asked to hold our position for approximately 15 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience. Through the window, I had watched as 2 F-22 Raptors had screamed past, their distinctive profile unmistakable even at a distance. They had been flying low, lower than regulation for a training exercise. And something about their flight pattern had set off alarm bells in my head. That was not a training formation. That was a combat air patrol. Sarah had leaned across the aisle again. Can I ask you something? Jake? And please, be honest with me. Why would a pilot with your record, with your skills, at the peak of your career, suddenly retire? You were only 32 when you left the service. That is young, especially for someone who had achieved what you did. And your wife, Maria Chen. She died 6 months before you left. Also a pilot. Also stationed at Nellis. Also flying experimental equipment. The words had hit me like cannon fire. I had turned to face her fully, and whatever she had seen in my expression had made her flinch back slightly. What exactly are you implying? I had asked, my voice low and dangerous. Sarah had held her ground, meeting my eyes without wavering. I am implying that I am a journalist who specializes in military aviation, and I have been investigating Obsidian Defense for the past year. They are a private defense contractor that has made billions selling advanced drone technology and electronic warfare systems to the Pentagon. Their CEO is a man named Former Colonel Richard Thorne. And 6 months before you left the Air Force, your wife died when the aircraft she was testing, an F-16 retrofitted with Obsidian Defense avionics, experienced what was officially ruled as pilot error, leading to catastrophic system failure. My heart had been hammering in my chest. How do you know all this? Because I am good at my job, Sarah had said simply. And because I think there is something wrong with Obsidian's technology. Something that has caused at least 3 incidents that I know of, including your wife's death. But every time I try to dig deeper, every time I try to get official reports or interview people who were there, I hit a wall. A wall built by people with a lot of power and a lot to lose. Then you should stop digging, I had said. But even as the words left my mouth, I had known they were hollow. It is dangerous. If you are right, if there is a cover-up, then the people behind it will not hesitate to silence you. The same way they silenced you? Sarah had asked softly. Before I could answer, a voice had cut through the cabin, polished and cold and achingly familiar. What an interesting conversation. Though I have to say, Ms. Vance. You should be careful about making accusations without evidence. Defamation is a serious matter. I had gone rigid in my seat, my entire body flooding with adrenaline. I had known that voice, had heard it in my nightmares for months. Slowly, I had turned to see Richard Thorne standing in the aisle, having apparently emerged from first class. He was in civilian clothes now, an expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. His silver hair perfectly styled, his smile sharp as a knife edge. "Riley," he had said, his tone mock-friendly. "What a delightful surprise. I had no idea you would be on this flight. Heading to DC. Are we? Perhaps for a job interview? I hear civilian life can be quite the adjustment after the excitement of military service." I had stood up, positioning myself between Thorne and Ethan, every muscle in my body tense. "Stay away from my son." Thorne had raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Hostile as ever. I see." I simply came back to stretch my legs and happened to overhear some wild speculation about my company. Obsidian Defense has an impeccable safety record. Ms. Vance. Every system we produce goes through rigorous testing and meets or exceeds all military standards. To suggest otherwise is not only false but potentially actionable. Sarah had stood as well, her phone now recording. "Then perhaps you would like to go on record explaining why 3 aircraft equipped with your systems have experienced catastrophic failures in the past 18 months? Or why the official reports of those incidents contain inconsistencies and missing data?" Thorne's smile had not wavered, but his eyes had gone cold. "Military investigations are confidential for good reason. National security is not a game. Ms. Vance. And as for inconsistencies, I think you will find that combat and test environments are unpredictable. Tragic accidents happen. Skilled people make fatal mistakes under pressure. It is the nature of the profession. Maria did not make a mistake," I had said, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "She was one of the best pilots I have ever seen. Whatever happened to her plane, it was not pilot error." "Ah, yes. Lieutenant Chen," Thorne had said, and the casual way he spoke her name made me want to hit him. "A terrible loss. I remember you were quite distraught at the time. In fact, your emotional state was one of the reasons your discharge was approved so readily. Grief can make people irrational, make them see conspiracies where there is only misfortune. You son of a maverick had suddenly been there, stepping between us, his hand on my chest. Sir, maybe we should all just calm down. This is not the place." But Thorne had already turned away, dismissing us like we were beneath his notice. "Enjoy your flight, Riley, and do try to move on with your life. Dwelling on the past is unhealthy." He had started to walk back toward first class, but Sarah had called after him. "Colonel Thorne, is it true that Obsidian Defense's stock price tripled after the Pentagon signed a contract for your new autonomous combat drone system, the same system that supposedly will make human pilots obsolete?" Thorne had paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Ms. Vance, progress is inevitable. The future of air combat is not in fragile human bodies pulling G's until they black out. It is in precision, efficiency, and technological superiority. Men like Riley here, they are relics of a bygone era. Romantic, certainly, but ultimately replaceable." The words had landed like a physical blow. I had spent my entire adult life in the cockpit, had defined myself by my ability to fly, to fight, to push myself and my aircraft to the absolute limit. And now I was being told I was obsolete, that everything I had sacrificed, everything Maria had sacrificed, was meaningless in the face of automated systems and artificial intelligence. Ethan had tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, is that true? Are pilots really not needed anymore?" I had knelt down, meeting my son's worried eyes. "Hey, buddy. No matter what anyone says, there will always be a need for brave people willing to protect others. The tools might change, but the courage does not. Okay?" He had nodded, but I could see the doubt in his face. The way his faith in his hero father had been shaken. And that, more than anything, Thorne had said, had made my blood boil. The plane had finally been cleared for takeoff. We had taxied onto the runway. The engines spooling up to full power. The familiar vibration of acceleration pressing us back into our seats. Ethan had gripped my hand tightly, his excitement overcoming his earlier worry. This was always his favorite part. The moment when metal and engineering and physics combined to defeat gravity itself. We had lifted off smoothly, the ground falling away beneath us. Las Vegas shrinking to a glittering grid in the desert. The climb had been normal. Routine. Exactly as it should be. I had started to relax. Started to think that maybe we could just get through this flight without further incident. I should have known better. We had been at cruising altitude for about 20 minutes when the first warning light appeared on the cockpit display, visible from my window seat. I had flown enough hours to recognize the master caution signal even from a distance. Then the plane had shuddered. Not the normal turbulence we had experienced earlier, but something more violent. More wrong. The intercom had crackled to life, the captain's voice tight with stress. Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. Around us. Passengers had looked at each other nervously. The plane had shuddered, again. Harder this time. And several overhead bins had popped open. Someone had screamed. Sarah had grabbed her laptop to keep it from sliding off her tray table. Then the emergency alarms had started blaring, and all the lights had flickered and died, plunging us into dimness lit only by the emergency strips along the floor. Ethan had clutched my arm. Dad? Dad? What is happening? It is okay. I had lied. My mind already racing through possibilities. Just some mechanical trouble. Nothing the pilots can't handle. But then the co-pilot had burst out of the cockpit. His face pale. His hands shaking. Is there anyone on this plane with flight experience? The captain is unconscious and I cannot get the controls to respond. We are locked out of our own systems. The cabin had erupted into chaos. People shouting, crying, praying. The plane had banked sharply to the left, throwing passengers against their restraints. Oxygen masks had dropped from the ceiling, swinging wildly. I had looked out the window and seen what I had feared. The two F-22 seconds from earlier were there, flanking us, far closer than any fighter should be to a commercial aircraft. But they were not attacking. They were trying to communicate, their pilots frantically gesturing. But our radios were dead. Sarah had grabbed my arm, shouting over the noise. Jake, you have to do something. You are the only one who can fly this thing. I had looked at Ethan, at his terrified face, and made a decision that would either save us all or kill us trying. Stay here. Stay in your seat no matter what happens. Do you understand, Dad? No, do not leave me. I had kissed his forehead. I will come back. I promise. I always come back. Then I had unbuckled and lurched toward the cockpit, fighting against the erratic movements of the aircraft. Maverick had been right behind me, his training kicking in despite the fact that he had never flown anything but military jets. I am coming with you. Sir, you might need an extra pair of hands. The cockpit had been a nightmare. The captain slumped over the controls, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead where he had struck the instrument panel. The co-pilot fumbling with switches that did nothing. His training failing in the face of a situation he had never prepared for. And the displays, showing errors I had never seen before. Diagnostic codes that made no sense. Like the plane's entire computer system had been corrupted or overridden. Move, I had ordered. And the co-pilot had scrambled out of the way. I had slid into the captain's seat, my hands finding the controls by muscle memory. But the co-pilot was right, nothing was responding. The yoke was locked. The throttles frozen. Every input I tried met with nothing. We were flying on autopilot, but an autopilot that had been compromised, that was following instructions from somewhere other than this cockpit. This is not mechanical failure, I had said, my mind working frantically. This is electronic warfare. Someone is remotely accessing our flight systems. Maverick had looked at me with horror. That is supposed to be impossible. The FAA has redundancies. Firewalls. Physical cutoffs. Unless someone designed a backdoor, I had said. And suddenly, everything had clicked into place. Obsidian Defense did not just make drones. They made the electronic systems that controlled them. Systems that could override human input. That could take control of aircraft remotely. Systems that, if you knew how they worked, you could use to hijack a commercial airliner. Thorn. I had breathed. That bastard. He is doing this. I had fumbled for the radio, trying every frequency I knew, but gotten only static. We were being jammed. Whoever was doing this, they did not want us talking to anyone. But then I had remembered something. The F-22 seconds outside were trying to get our attention. They had line of sight. They could see us. Could communicate if we found the right way. Open the storm window, I had told Maverick. Left side. He had stared at me like I was crazy. Sir, we are at 30,000 feet. Do it. He had complied, struggling with the latch until the small panel opened, letting in a rush of freezing air. I had grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit and started flashing it in a pattern. Old-school Morse code that every military pilot knew. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. SOS. Then spelled out, hijacked. Remote control. Help. One of the F-22 pilots had seen it. His aircraft had waggled its wings in acknowledgement, then peeled off, presumably to relay the message to whoever was coordinating this situation. The other F-22 had moved closer. Dangerously close, and I had seen the pilot clearly through his canopy. He was young, probably fresh out of flight school, but his eyes were steady and determined. He had pointed down, then made a diving motion. He was telling me to descend, to get to a lower altitude where the air was thicker, where maybe we would have more control options. But we still could not fly the plane. Whatever control inputs I tried, the system ignored them. We were passengers in our own cockpit, helpless. Unless the circuit breakers, I had said. A desperate plan forming. Behind the co-pilot seat. Find the ones labeled FMCS and pull them. All of them. But, sir, that is the flight management computer system. We will lose all automation. That is the point. If someone is controlling us remotely, they are doing it through the computer. We go analog. We go manual. Old school stick and rudder flying. The plane will drop like a rock. Only until I catch it. Trust me. Maverick had hesitated for only a second before moving to comply. His hands had worked quickly, pulling breakers one after another. The displays had started dying. Error messages cascading across the screens. Then, suddenly, the yoke had gone light in my hands. The autopilot was off. The plane was ours again. We had immediately started to fall. Not a controlled descent, but a genuine plummet. The nose dropping as the automated systems that had been holding us in the air stopped fighting gravity. Passengers had screamed. The descent steep enough that anyone not belted in would have hit the ceiling. But I had been ready. I had spent thousands of hours in a cockpit. Had recovered from worse situations. Had trained for every possible emergency until the responses were burned into my nervous system. My hands had moved before my conscious mind had fully processed what they were doing. Pull back on the yoke. But not too much, or we would stall. Add power. Even throttle advance. Feel the engines respond. Ease the nose up. Fighting the momentum. Fighting the inertia of a 200-ton aircraft that wanted to keep falling. The airframe had groaned. The stress warning sounds adding to the chaos. I had been acutely aware that commercial aircraft were not built for the kind of maneuvering I was doing. That every control input risked structural damage. But slowly, degree by degree, I had wrestled us back into controlled flight. The altimeter had shown we had lost almost 5,000 feet. But we were level now. Flying straight. Responsive to my commands. Holy. Maverick had been gripping the back of my seat. His knuckles white. Sir? That was the most incredible piece of flying I have ever seen. I had not responded. Too focused on what came next. Because we were flying manually now. But we were still 50 miles from the nearest airport. Still had a plane full of terrified passengers. Still had someone out there who had tried to kill us all and would probably try again. And I had no doubt who that someone was. I had told Maverick to check on the captain. To see if he could be revived. Then I had used the PA system. Hoping it still worked now that we were off the main computer. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jake Riley. I am a former Air Force pilot, and I have taken control of the aircraft. We experienced a serious systems malfunction, but we are now flying safely. I am going to get us on the ground at the nearest suitable airport. Stay in your seats. Stay calm. And trust me. I have done this before. My voice had been steady. Confident. Projecting a certainty I did not entirely feel. But it seemed to work. The screaming stopped. People were still terrified. But they were quiet. Hopeful. Through the windscreen, I had seen the F-22 pilot giving me a thumbs up. He was staying with us. Providing an escort. It was unusual. Unauthorized, probably. But I had never been more grateful for another pilot's presence. Sarah had appeared in the cockpit doorway, steadying herself against the frame. Jake. Thorne is gone. After the systems failed, he went into the bathroom and has not come out. I tried the door, but it is locked. Of course. He would not want to be seen when we survived. When his attempt to silence me failed. He was probably erasing evidence. Destroying whatever device he had used to compromise our aircraft. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated me. Had thought I was broken. Defeated. Just another grieving widower, too scared to fight back. He had not considered that giving me something to protect. Someone to save. It would make me more dangerous than I had ever been in combat. Maverick. Take the controls. I had said. Sir. I have never flown a commercial jet. Just keep it level. I will be right back. I had moved through the cabin. Passengers reaching out to touch my arm as I passed. Offering thanks and prayers. Ethan had been crying but safe. Held by a grandmother type who had probably had her own children once. I am proud of you. Dad. Ethan had said as I passed. And my heart had swelled even as I kept moving toward the rear of the plane. The bathroom door at the back was still locked. I had pounded on it. Thorne, open up, it is over. No response. I had checked the flight attendant station. Found the universal key they used for situations like this. My hands had been shaking with adrenaline and rage as I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Thorne had been inside. Looking remarkably composed considering we had just nearly died. In his hand was a small electronic device. About the size of a phone. With an antenna and what looked like a complex control interface. As I watched, he had crushed it against the sink. Shattering it into pieces. Riley. He had said calmly. I was just about to come out. Terrible turbulence. I felt unwell. Lucky you were here to save the day. Very heroic. You tried to kill us. All of us. To cover up what happened to Maria. Thorne had smiled. Actually smiled. You have no proof of anything. I was a passenger on this flight. Same as everyone else. And these wild accusations, they make you sound paranoid. Unbalanced. Like maybe your discharge was for psychological reasons. I had wanted to hit him. Every fiber of my being had screamed to make him hurt the way he had made me hurt. But that would make me no better than him. Would give him exactly the ammunition he needed to destroy what remained of my credibility. So instead I had grabbed him by the front of his expensive suit and dragged him back toward the cockpit. His protests and struggles meaningless against adrenaline-fueled strength. Sarah had been waiting, her phone still recording. "I got it," she had said, her eyes bright with triumph. All of it. Him going into the bathroom right when the systems failed. The look on his face when he realized we were not going down. Him destroying that device. The FAA is going to want to see this. The FBI is definitely going to want to see this. Thorne had gone pale. That was a phone. My personal phone. I have a right to privacy. A phone with a military-grade antenna array? Sarah had countered. A phone you destroyed the moment we regained control? I am a tech journalist. Colonel. I know what electronic warfare equipment looks like. The F-22 pilot had been gesturing again. More urgently now. I had looked ahead and seen our destination, Nellis Air Force Base. We were going home. Coming full circle to where this had all started. The tower had been vectoring us in. Every emergency vehicle they had standing by. I had lined us up on final approach. My hands steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. The come down from the adrenaline high starting to hit. Gear down. I had told Maverick. And he had complied. The landing gear extending with a reassuring thunk. The runway had stretched before us. Shimmering in the Nevada heat. I had made this approach hundreds of times in F-22 seconds. But never in a crippled commercial jet with no computer assistance. Everything was by feel. By sight. By the accumulated knowledge of thousands of flight hours. 50 feet. 40. 30. The ground coming up fast. Pull back slightly. Flare the nose. Let the main wheels touch first. A slight bounce. Then we were down. Rolling. Speed bleeding off. I had applied the brakes carefully. Evenly. Feeling the aircraft respond. We had stopped with half the runway still ahead of us. Emergency crews had surrounded the plane immediately. But we were safe. Everyone was safe. The cabin had erupted in cheers and applause. I had sat there in the captain's seat. Hands finally starting to shake. The full weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. Ethan had come running forward, throwing himself into my arms. And I had held him tight, breathing in the scent of his hair. Letting the tears finally come. You did it, Dad. You saved everyone. We did it, buddy. We all did. Outside. Military police had been waiting. They had taken Thorne into custody the moment he stepped off the plane. His protest about lawyers and rights falling on unsympathetic ears. The device he had destroyed was evidence in an attempted mass murder. His connections. His money. His influence. None of it could save him now. Sarah had handed over her footage to the FBI agents who arrived within minutes. She had documented everything. From Thorne's presence on the plane to the system's failure to his destruction of the control device. Combined with my testimony about what he had said in his office 6 months ago. About the inconsistencies in Maria's accident report. It was enough to start a real investigation. Over the following weeks, it had all unraveled. Obsidian Defense's systems had backdoors built into the SEEP, them. Ostensibly for military override purposes, but actually for corporate espionage and sabotage. Thorne had been systematically eliminating anyone who got too close to discovering these flaws. Including test pilots who noticed anomalies. Engineers who raised concerns. And journalists who asked questions. Maria had been one of those pilots. She had filed a report about unexpected system behavior during a test flight. Had recommended further investigation before the technology was deployed. 2 days later, her aircraft had suffered catastrophic failure. The official investigation had been